Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we discuss causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Michael Carroll. He's a compliance manager over at Yugabyte. Michael, welcome.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here, Pete.
Awesome. Well, could you give our audience a little bit of background on yourself and what you've been up to professionally speaking?
Yeah, so my name's Mike Carroll, like Pete alluded to. I'm currently a compliance manager at Yugabyte and responsible for leading a lot of their attestation and certification efforts. Before that experience, really began my career in the IT audit space with a CPA firm, transitioned over into cybersecurity consulting, did that for about 6 years, and now made the jump into the internal world.
Awesome. So yeah, I've worked with a lot of consulting firms over the years. The consulting industry is kind of its own animal for sure. How are you enjoying the transition from consulting to the internal life?
Enjoying it quite a bit. I think starting out in the consulting and the audit space was a great opportunity. You got to see a lot of how different organizations achieve their security goals, pursue certifications, and really just get a ton of experience across a pretty broad array of clients and industries and whatnot. But enjoyed the jump into the internal world. It's been really cool to be able to kind of translate some of that information that I learned and help a new organization be successful. So it's been a great challenge.
Awesome. Yeah. I'd imagine your hiring challenges are a little bit different on the internal side versus being on the external side. Are there some specific hiring challenges that you've encountered over the years that, maybe they relate to the talent gap, maybe they don't, but maybe we can kind of talk through some common issues that you've seen and maybe talk through some solutions.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge honestly just starts with defining a role. One of the things about cybersecurity is that it changes very quick in terms of, what we're trying to do as an organization, but also the underlying technologies. So, trying to even define like what are the skills for this role going to be 1, 2, 3 years down the road, that's been a challenge in and of itself. So always looking for people who are comfortable being uncomfortable, very adaptable. And I think trying to find people that have those traits has been a challenge. But when you find those people, it's very rewarding to work with them.
For sure. Yeah. You get that person on board and they blow all your expectations out of the water. I think a lot of people kind of struggle with how do you identify those people, especially if it's intangibles, if it's not something you can see on a resume. How were, I guess, you or the recruiters or HR people you were working with identifying those folks that were kind of the rock stars that, you couldn't necessarily see on paper?
Yeah, to your point, I think the biggest thing is just kind of your gut intuition. When you're talking to somebody and they're going through their past experiences, you're able to see like, have they had to go through adversity and, what type of experiences did they have? So for instance, if I see somebody who's got maybe a consulting background, for instance, and they've worked on things like NIST, ISO, SOC 2, PCI, just gone through a bunch of different certifications, I can tell that they're able to really translate their skills across a really broad array of different things, and they might be a good asset to our team.
Gotcha. So you look for a variety of experience and adaptability. How do you test for critical thinking ability or desire to learn, stuff like that?
The first thing is we always ask, what types of books are they reading or, what types of activities have they been working on, whether that's Try Hack Me, Hack the Box, or other different platforms like that. Just really making sure that they've got a passion for the industry and that they're eager to learn. I think that's the biggest thing. When we talk about people having experience, a lot of individuals, especially job seekers, really assume that they need experience as a SOC analyst or working for a Fortune 500 company. But experience means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So the folks who go out of their way to get experience, even in non-traditional methods, really show me that they've got a great passion for the field.
Cool. What about somebody that's specifically more GRC focused? What would be some resources that you would see them leverage or, places that they could learn?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing really is just kind of diving into the certifications. A lot of those frameworks are available, some even for free when you're thinking about things like NIST, and other ones are at kind of a minimal fee like ISO. And you can, really tell how interested somebody is in those frameworks if they actually read up on them, see, what requirements are these frameworks forcing on companies, and even going a step further and thinking through, if I'm a company who wants to pursue high trust or PCI, whatever the case may be, what types of things could I implement to meet this control and to be in compliance with that framework?
Yeah, or I guess to think about the implications of what passing that audit would look like, what it would actually mean to the business, and being
Yep.
able to translate what you're looking to do as an auditor or compliance person and help the business understand the value of that. I hear a lot about how, especially for external auditors, clients can be difficult. They don't want to get you all the evidence that you need. It takes a lot of time. They don't see the value in what you're doing. You're just an auditor. You're coming in from the outside trying to mess up their whole operations and get them basically. Which I know that's not your goal, but I think there's a lot of companies and clients that will kind of feel that way. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what's been your role, I guess, in hiring for your consulting firms that you've worked for in your current role? How do you kind of fit in with HR and recruiting, and how do you process candidates? And I guess as a follow up to that, do you see any challenges in communication between or among the process and all of that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is it really starts with the roadmap, taking a step backwards. I'll speak with our director of security and try to figure out, what are the big challenges that we're facing or what are our goals for the year? And from there, we identify, how many people do we need on the team and specifically what skill sets do we need? So that really drives the interest in pursuing a new candidate. From there, I work very closely with HR in terms of writing up the job description and just trying to figure out, even just culturally, like what type of person is going to succeed in this role. So I think that's one thing that we've done very well is trying to identify what's the profile of somebody who's going to successfully fulfill this type of role. From there, typically HR is going to handle the initial screenings, and then our team's going to do some of the deeper dives, the technical interviews, diving into their experience and just kind of figuring out, are they going to be a good fit for this organization and for this particular role?
That's awesome. Yeah, I think the closer you can be to HR and the more time that you can invest in the beginning, the more it's going to pay off dividends in the long run. You're not going to be spending hours and hours wasting time interviewing candidates that don't meet the basic qualifications or experience that you're looking for. One thing I hear a lot is HR always has to kind of put their stamp on the job description and tweak it. And that's how you end up with, CISSP for entry level jobs. Do you find that's an issue for your organization or previously with the companies you've worked for?
Previously, I think it has been. And frankly, I kind of think that there's not enough input from the hiring manager if that's going on. You have to know as a hiring manager that there's at least 5 years of experience with different caveats for certain certifications. So if you're truly hiring an entry level individual, putting those certifications on that job description really doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think to your point, staying connected with the recruiters and with the HR team and coming up with a good job description that really represents the person you want to hire is critical to being successful in that process.
Yeah, fair enough. So I guess you mentioned that HR would like do the screening. How do you ensure that HR recruiters or whatever the function may be within your organization, how do you make sure that they are screening people appropriately and not, I guess, knocking people out that would be a fit that potentially you could be really happy with? But say HR recruiters, they don't know exactly what they're looking at, what they're looking for. How do you make sure that that doesn't happen? Because I hear a lot about companies that just don't get back to people. There's a lot of broken hiring processes with recruiters. I think a lot of times recruiters are incentivized not to get back to people. They're only incentivized to make placements. And if they get 500 applicants for a job, then they only get back to the first 10. And then anybody that's of those 490 left, they don't get contacted back. And there could be some really good candidates in there. So how do you ensure that HR is screening everybody and also screening people appropriately and getting you the right people?
Yeah, so there's quite a bit to unpack there, but I think At the crux of it, the biggest thing that we do to stay successful there is staying very close to the process. We don't just pass off responsibility to HR or recruiting to find the right people. That's really a process that we own, and HR and recruiting definitely help us out a lot in that manner. But the first way that we do it is we actually are responsible, we being the security team, for going through the resumes and picking who we want HR to talk to. So we'll look through the resumes and see, at least on paper, does this individual have the type of experience, the types of certifications, whatever the case may be, that we're looking for. So we'll narrow it down to maybe 5, 6, 7 people, depending on the role, and let recruiting know, yep, these are the people we're interested in. Can you please set up an initial screen with them? And we want to make sure that we're setting up our recruiters for success, right? So we're not going to have them doing these very technical interviews for things that they might not be very comfortable with. The biggest thing that we want our recruiters to be able to figure out is A, are they actually interested in the job? Did they do their homework in the company? And then B, and I think this is one of the most important things, are they going to be a good cultural fit? The recruiters have a lot of good experience across the board with different departments, and especially being in compliance, if you're not able to get along with other team members well, you're not going to succeed very easily. So we want to make sure that A, recruiters know the responsibilities, and that B, they're bringing in people with a good cultural fit, knowing that we kind of own the responsibility of making sure they've got the right skills from a technical perspective.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I hear a lot about how, and I see on LinkedIn even, like if a job is posted, sometimes they get dozens, hundreds, even thousands of applicants. Do you find that you get a ton of applicants and you're having to sift through thousands of resumes? Or because, I think ultimately, ideally, the recruiters would know how to screen those resumes properly and it wouldn't fall on the hiring team. But I understand probably why you do it. It's just, because the recruiters don't have that background, you want to make sure it's right. But how do you approach it if you have 1,000 resumes? How do you pare that down?
Yeah, that really hasn't been relevant to us. So I haven't faced that challenge quite yet. Being a smaller company, we don't get the same amount of applicants as maybe a Microsoft or a Google or something like that. So up to this point, it's been fairly manageable for us. I would say we probably get around 50 to 60 resumes for the average role. That's also dependent on the market too. The market when I was onboarded a year ago is pretty drastically different from what it is today. So as it gets bigger and bigger, I think recruiters would play a larger role, and maybe even leveraging tools to identify, certain buzzwords or other information on resumes that might be relevant to a role.
Interesting. Yeah, I find that as a recruiter, I'm screening resumes and LinkedIn profiles, and I'll go through thousands in a day. It's just, I've gotten so quick at it, 5 to 10 seconds on each one, and I just kind of know what to look for. One thing that I think separates humans from any sort of automation as far as screening goes is being able to kind of read between the lines, not so much just reading the keywords that are there, but thinking about what other potential keywords might be related to those keywords. And it might show that that person's actually doing the job you want them to have been doing. It's just not explicitly stated on that resume. So I think that's one kind of word of caution for any sort of automation that companies might employ until we have AGI, and that's a whole different topic, artificial general intelligence. We may get there eventually, and at which point I think they'll be as good as the really seasoned recruiters. But until then, I don't know, color me skeptical, I guess. But yeah, that's awesome that you've been able to be so involved in that. And how long would you say that you actually spend looking at one resume? Because for, recruiters, for instance, it's 5 to 10 seconds. What about a hiring manager like yourself?
Maybe a little bit longer, 10 to 20 seconds is kind of the average. To your point, kind of going back to those buzzwords, though, you can also tell a lot if someone has too much on their resume, right? If they list that they're experts in 30 different frameworks, I know very quickly that they're trying to game the system. So I read between the lines there as well. But for me, I would say maybe 20 to 30 seconds of looking at a resume. I can tell, at least on paper, do they have the experience that's going to be appropriate for a role.
And then just out of curiosity, how many interview rounds do you typically work with?
It's typically going to be 3 to 4. So the first one is going to be that interview with the recruiter, just, kind of a getting to know you type of conversation. And again, just figuring out, is it going to be a good cultural fit? The second one's going to be talking to whoever the direct manager of that individual is going to be, just a conversation between those two, diving into that individual's experience and just kind of talking through things that are going to be relevant to the job. The third one is going to be an actual technical interview where it's almost like a quiz, but we do it in person, face to face, and just kind of figure out, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Especially in the security world where you have to have, good technical skills, good soft skills, as well as, top tier business acumen. We want to drill down and say, we recognize that not everyone's going to be super proficient in all three of those. But if we did onboard you, where's the best fit for you? And there could be interviews beyond that if we'd like for, somebody to speak with a member of a different team. For example, we roll up into legal, so sometimes it might make sense for general counsel to interview those individuals as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I think kind of the best practice I've found is like 2 to 3 interview rounds is kind of the sweet spot. If you don't do enough and you only do one interview round, the candidates tend to get spooked because they think you're not doing your due diligence, especially if you're a security candidate and you're worried about trust and verifying and things like that. Whereas if you go too long, then candidates feel like there's either a lot of organizational red tape, or it's tough for the organization to make a decision, or there's too many hands in the cookie jar, and disorganization is a problem. So I'd say 2 to 3 rounds is kind of the sweet spot. And I can't stress enough how important it is to get back to people quickly. Like, I don't know, Mike, maybe you can speak to how quickly you guys get back to people. But for me, I try and keep it to where hiring managers are getting back to people within a couple days at the latest after an interview. You wait any longer than that, and people's interest level drops off sharply. And if they have 3-4 offers at once, like was happening a year ago, I'm sure it is somewhat still now, but not as much as a year ago. Like you said, the market has changed, but speed is so paramount. Have you found that sometimes people drop off quickly and accept other offers, or are you guys pretty good about getting people on board?
Luckily, I think we're pretty quick. It's obviously a balancing game, right? You need to spend the time to make sure they're going to be a good fit, because the cost to, potentially terminate somebody or just realize it's not a good fit and rehire, that gets very expensive. But we also recognize that, speed is really a competitive advantage when it comes to hiring and just being able to make good decisions quickly. So I would say that each round after an interview, it's probably 1 to 2 days until they figure out next steps, whether that's a job offer or a second, third interview, whatever the case may be. And really cradle to grave in terms of when we choose someone until the point where we hire them. We try to keep that to around 2 to 3 weeks. And I think we've done that pretty successfully up to this point.
That's amazing. That's a great turnaround time. Yeah, some companies I talk to, I'll ask them and they don't even know how long it's taking to get somebody on board. And that's so crucial. Not just feedback after a single interview, but how long the whole process takes. I had one client, they're a SaaS company. They were doing 6 rounds of interviews, and people would get burnt out after usually about 3, and the whole process would take, at least a month, usually a month and a half. And that's just too long, especially again, when people have options, they're going to move on. Even if they are really excited about the job. I've had that happen. They'll even tell me, like, look, Pete, you've been great. Seems like a great company, but they're just taking too long. I can't wait around forever. So that's awesome. You guys can turn it around that quick.
Especially in the security world. I mean, with agile methodologies and so many other similar topics, in the security world, people like to move fast. So I think when you do everything in your career very fast, then you run into a slow recruiting process. It kind of, sways your opinion, and you might say, well, how quickly can the company move? And in the startup world, I think people look for speed when it comes to organizations.
For sure. And that's your consulting background speaking, being able to juggle a ton of projects and work quickly and make sure all the clients are happy and stuff like that. I'd imagine that informs your hiring strategy and stuff like that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So we already kind of covered how you're involved with your organization and stuff like that. Seems like you're pretty realistic as a hiring manager, and I would guess that people love reporting to you. Could you kind of describe some of your greatest accomplishments as a hiring manager?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just being a hiring manager. One of the most powerful things that we can do is just be an advocate for those people who are trying to get that entry level job. And actually had a story where we did that pretty well. we were hiring for a position that technically required 2 to 3 years of experience. But one of the individuals that we interviewed with was entry level, didn't have much experience, but we were just blown away with his skills. And just, when you talk to him, he gives you a ton of confidence. And we ended up hiring him. And it was, I would say, the best hire of my career. Just really impressed with someone in entry level doing everything that he should be. And the thing that impresses me the most about him and really anyone else entry level is when you can give them a project knowing they're probably not going to know all the answers, and they can do a good job to, get as far as they can and then ask the right questions at the end. And going back to his resume in the interview process, he had a lot of great experience where he showed that, he was willing to learn on the job. And even though he didn't have, a traditional experience, he took on the onus of taking various classes, going to boot camps, and he actually worked for a family friend, just doing some basic IT cleanup, updating operating systems, installing AV agents. And we were just really comfortable with, he might be entry level right now, but 6, 12 months down the road, he's going to be a rock star. And he absolutely blew it out of the water, and just very impressed with him.
That's cool. So I've been a huge advocate for hiring at the entry level. I think not nearly enough companies do it. And I think the talent shortage is going to continue to get worse because not enough companies are investing in entry level people. How did you justify hiring an entry level person over somebody who's more experienced?
So I think one of the challenges of being a hiring manager is that you've got, pretty strong demands on you to get things done quick. So what that does is it almost forces you into a situation where you want to pick the person who's going to hit the ground running and just get up to speed really quickly. But there's really two aspects I like to consider as a hiring manager. Where is the person now in terms of their skill sets? But also, what does their trajectory look like? Where are they going to be again in 6, 12, 18 months? And so we knew that, day one, he's still going to be learning and maybe be a little bit limited in terms of what he could do. But 6 months down the road, we knew we were making an investment and that it was going to pay off. And that's really what came to fruition for us. So just seeing his trajectory, where he was headed, along with some of the business acumen and the soft skills, made it pretty easy for us to justify that hire.
Gotcha. Do you have any ideas about how you could kind of do that at scale and hire, more than just the single entry level person and truly build a pipeline of people so that in, 6, 12, 18 months, you have more people coming through the door?
At scale, I think it would probably be recognizing maybe a strong college program or even a boot camp and just aligning with them. I think there's a lot of great hires who come out of those boot camps. So if you find one where those individuals are coming, out with the right skill sets and aligning and just kind of, being able to maintain that relationship with the boot camp or the college, whatever the case may be, I think that gives you a good opportunity to do that at a larger scale than we had to.
For sure. Yeah, that's great. I started a campus recruiting program at the consulting firm I worked for, and we got that off the ground pretty quickly. And before long, we're hiring a dozen people per semester. And, you figure they get up and running. This was for a consulting firm. They get up and running in 6 to 12 months, as long as you're hanging on to them. And I think the key there is retention. They become profit generating for the company, especially consulting firms. So I kind of like to say that I think the onus to partially solve the talent gap is on the consulting firms and the MSSPs. They can train people knowing that they're going to be profit generating for the company. And they could almost kind of be like a training ground for new hires in the security field. The challenge is that, are they getting that ROI? Are people sticking around long enough to where they're getting their money's worth after having invested all of that time and those resources in those people? So, retention becomes a big piece of that. What are some best practices in your mind, I guess, as far as retaining people?
I think the biggest thing, especially when you're hiring top performers, is they want to know the scoreboard, so to speak. They want to know if they're achieving success. So really taking the time to identify objectives that are relevant to their job, that are feasible, and on top of just those organizational objectives, helping them set more personal objectives for how they're going to further their career. I think if you try to lock people in just with money, that's not going to be enough, because there's always going to be another company who's willing to pay more than you. So you have to go beyond that and make sure that you're really developing them And I think that gives people a much bigger incentive to stay with you as a company. So I think, clearly setting expectations and helping to fuel someone's growth is key to keeping them around.
Totally agree. Yeah, one of the things I look out for as a recruiter is when I'm talking about somebody's motivators, which I spend a lot of time on. I look out for that money part. Money is important, and you have to, have a certain amount of money to maintain your standard of living and stuff like that. And I never ask anybody to take a pay cut or anything like that. Think, especially with a security skill set, you just don't need to. There's too much opportunity out there for you to need to do that. That said, yeah, I think focusing on the other motivators, how can somebody truly feel fulfilled? In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that would be the self-actualization piece. If you can help somebody feel self-actualized, get into a flow state and kind of stay there and enjoy the work that they do, feel like they're accomplishing something, that's something that it feels very tangible, even though it's kind of ethereal. um, and it's something that'll definitely help people hang on. I think that because that's so hard to find. That if you manage to match that for somebody and they have it, they're not going to want to give it up, and that's going to help way more than 401k vesting schedules or sign-on bonus payback programs, which I've seen plenty in the consulting world, um, and spending the time up front to make sure that you understand somebody's motivators and make sure your job is matching those. Sometimes people will tell you kind of what you want to hear just to get on board, but you have to be cognizant of that and really try and dig into those motivators and make sure that it's going to be a good long-term match. Because like you said, that money jump is always going to be there. It's just a matter of time before somebody like me hits them up and says, "Hey, I can get you this job that pays an extra 40 grand. Are you game?" And if they jump for money once, chances are they'll do it again. So, um, totally agree there. What advice would you give, I guess, to job seekers who are having difficulties securing interviews?
Yeah, I think whether it's, applying for a promotion or a new job, the answer that you always need to answer for, or the question you need to answer for the hiring manager is, how are you capable of doing this job? Right. And so if you could get some type of experience showing that you're comfortable with IT topics or security topics, that's always going to play into your favor in a big way. So again, whether that's doing something like Hack the Box or Try Hack Me, something along those lines, or maybe even just setting up your own home lab and configuring firewalls, switches, routers, any real world hands on experience that you can put on your resume and talk through how you solved the problem is going to help you in a very big way. So just finding a way to A, get that experience, and B, make sure that it's very well described on your resume, I think is going to help you land those initial interviews.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think a lot of people that get stuck and are not getting interviews, what they're doing is they're going out there and applying to hundreds of jobs. And I'll often hear on LinkedIn, "Well, I applied to 300 jobs, and I haven't even got a call back." So, what would you say to that person that's struggling to even get a call back? Where would you tell them to start to analyze what's going wrong?
Yeah, I think just trying to get hotter leads into a company by maybe networking or connecting with people in those companies could lead to more success, whether that's connecting with a recruiter or maybe even a hiring manager and just getting to know them on LinkedIn. That kind of builds that more personal connection. And when they do see your resume show up under the application, I think it gives you much better chance where they're going to pick your resume ahead of somebody else's who's a lot more of a question mark. So networking is definitely huge. You can leverage things like ISC squared or local ISACA chapters, which really gives you an in with a lot of people who are in a position to make some of those hiring decisions.
Yep, that's awesome. And for anybody who's more entry level, I believe a lot of these organizations have student memberships that you can do that are either free or super cheap. So those are great things to do, or even meetup groups. You just go to meetup.com and type in, information security or cybersecurity. Great way to network with people in the field, or finding inexpensive conferences to go to, stuff like that. Meeting people in person is so key, or at least on video where people have a face to put to the name. You're not just a number then, and it's way more likely that people are less willing to reject somebody that they've actually seen in person. So that's great advice. So Michael, obviously my podcast here is called the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. So I got to ask you about the talent gap. Is the talent gap real? And what does it look like if you say it is real?
I do believe that the talent gap currently is real. And I think the onus, again, is really on us as hiring managers to get more entry level folks into the door. Again, for those reasons that I talked about earlier, there's a lot of pressure to get things done in a timely manner. So, a key mistake that we've made is just trying to find people who can fill voids very quickly. And that kind of runs you into the problem where rather than training new talent, what you're doing is trying to get talent from different companies or different firms. And it's really a zero sum game across the board. So I do think the talent gap is real. And I think the fix to it really starts with bringing on and developing entry level talent.
For sure. Yeah. You have to build the talent pool, grow the talent pool. Where would you say the talent gap is most concentrated within security overall? Like, would you say it's more in GRC? Would you say it's more in DFIR? Would you say that it's, more at the mid-level, more at the senior level, more at the director level?
Yeah, in terms of industry, for like cybersecurity versus GRC, I think it's a problem across the board. I'm not sure if there's, one industry or field, if you will, that's more prevalent than others. I do think in terms of the level of experience, it's definitely at that beginner level. When you talk to folks who are kind of that senior associate level, 2 to 3 years, they tend to be the unicorns and can kind of call their shots in interviews in a lot of cases. So once you do break into the field and you get a year or two of experience, I think you can pretty much call your shots and go wherever you want to go.
Yep, totally agree. And especially if you go work for a consulting firm, even more so. That's why I've been a huge advocate for anybody breaking into the field. I tell them, go work for a consulting firm. You get more experience in 2 years than somebody internal to a company would get in 5. And you work with a variety of clients, so you see a variety of environments, variety of technology stacks, variety of people, industries. There's just so many different things that you see, and it's a great learning experience. But then inevitably, people usually get burnt out. I don't know if I should say usually, sometimes get burnt out. Then they go internally or go into management, go the partner path with the consulting firms. What would you say to somebody who's like, a 2, 3 year senior consultant right now? They're feeling a little burnt out. What would you tell them to do as far as next steps for their career?
So if they really enjoy the job that they're doing, I would encourage them just to communicate with their manager about that. A lot of people, myself included, really enjoy that consulting grind. But when you're running too hot for too long, it becomes a bit much, which is why you tend to look for those roles where, maybe there's not as much demand in terms of your hours. So I would say if you enjoy the role, definitely try to continue that path because consulting is a very rewarding and fulfilling type of path. If you're not enjoying the work or if you just want a different challenge, then it might make sense to pursue a different role. You could even stay within the same company and maybe try to pivot to a sales role or a QA role that's maybe a little bit less direct interaction with the clients. Or you could pursue maybe an industry type of role similar to what I did and, try to flex those same skills, but in a little bit different of an environment.
Yep, those are great ideas. Yeah, I've actually placed a few people now in more QA roles for consulting firms, where the hiring manager, the partner group was looking for somebody to QA reports for these attestation firms. And it was a really good fit for somebody who was like a manager, senior manager that was kind of burnt out with the consulting aspect and wanted to go into more of a back office role. Not every consulting firm has those departments, maybe as much as they should, but that's definitely a great path for folks. And I guess another thing I picked up on there was just radical transparency. Hopefully your team isn't toxic or your manager isn't toxic enough to where you feel like you can't bring up concerns. If so, it's probably time to look for another job anyway. But if it's not toxic and you feel like you can talk to your manager, just say, hey, I really love working here. I love everything about the company, the culture, the people. I'm just reaching a point where I just can't do much more and just kind of see what they say. And depending on their answer, that'll tell you a lot. You may get, well, just kind of hang in there, might get better in 6 months or after busy season or something like that, which, time to move on. Or you might get, hey, yeah, we know we've been working really hard. We'll definitely work on that, within a couple of weeks. Look at your schedule and it should be a little bit lighter. And you might get that response. You just never know unless you ask. Um, so, yeah, that's great. So yeah, we'd mentioned kind of the talent gap. I see it kind of as the talent bottleneck. Like you mentioned, it's more at the entry level than anything else. I think we have thousands of people trying to break into the field and just not enough entry level jobs in which for them to land. Um, where do you see the greatest opportunities for companies hiring at the entry level? Is it kind of what I said with the consulting firms and MSSPs, or do you think there's opportunity for the government to step in and create apprenticeships and things like that? At scale, I guess, how do you see that playing out in the next 5 years? Who is the onus on, um, organization wise or government wise, or what can we do there?
Yeah, I don't know that it boils down to a particular industry per se. What I will say is that I think, especially in the GRC space, there's a lot of opportunity there. The thing with GRC is that you could take on individuals from a variety of backgrounds. A lot of people pivot from accounting because there's some translation in terms of how you would audit financial statements versus an IT system. You could bring on people who just have great business acumen, or you could bring on people who have great technical acumen. So there's a large pool that you can pull from and find a role within your firm where they're going to be successful. I'm partially biased because I spent the majority of my career in GRC. But when I look at that field and how broad it is, there's just such a huge pool of A players that you could pull from and, train and develop to ensure they're successful for your firm.
Yeah, fair enough. I've been recruiting and consulting in GRC for a long time, and one thing I hear from the other side of the fence, the more technical folks, the cybersecurity people, the DFIR people, the security engineers, operations, they tend to say, well, this auditor that's auditing me, they're not technical enough to know what's actually going on here. So how can they audit me if they don't know what they're auditing? Um, how do we get more technical auditors, people that really come from more of the technology side versus accounting?
I think pulling people from, that technology background that want to break into cybersecurity. There's a ton of folks with great IT experience who understand the IT stack and, maybe haven't gone through an audit or cybersecurity per se, but, people who have worked on help desk, for instance, have triaged a number of problems. They understand a lot of the ins and outs of the tech stack. So pulling people from that type of background or similar backgrounds could be really beneficial to making sure that you've got the right technical expertise. I think the second part of that too, and a lot of cybersecurity firms have recognized this, is having a thorough training program, right? Making sure that for especially entry level folks, that you're giving them opportunities to learn what a tech stack looks like, how networking operates, things like that. And again, that's all just part of developing your people.
Gotcha. That's awesome. So, GRC maybe not necessarily the sexiest type of field for somebody coming from the nuts and bolts of technology. And, it seems like everybody, when they want to break into cyber, quote unquote, I would say information security, but cybersecurity, some people say there's a difference between cyber and GRC, but security, information security in general. How do you sell GRC to somebody who thinks they're going to come in and be a pen tester, for instance?
We ask the biggest question we always ask working for a cybersecurity firm is, how do you feel about writing? Because that's a really big thing that you're going to do in GRC. So for somebody who wants more technical experience, working for a NOC or a SOC or pursuing a pen test role is something that might be beneficial. But again, going back to communication, just making sure that they understand the role and what they're going to be doing is key to deciding if they're going to stick around or not. One other thing that we've seen, though, is for individuals who maybe want to pursue that more technical role, this could be a stepping stone for them, where they're going to see a lot of different technologies, maybe not as deep of a level as they want to, but they can use that experience to pivot to maybe a pen test role or something that's a bit more technical in nature.
Yep, for sure. And I've actually seen a few people do that where they'll come on board with a consulting firm as an auditor, and they'll be doing some self study, maybe go get their OSCP and if the consulting firm also does pen testing, then over time they end up transferring over to the pen testing team. And then from there, sky's the limit. You could do whatever you want within the field, because once you have that job title underneath your belt, that's really the big thing. As recruiters, we look for job titles and responsibilities. As long as you can say, hey, I've done this thing in a professional setting for at least 6 months, the world is your oyster, pretty much. So yeah, that's some great advice. So I guess just final question for you, Mike. What are people not talking about but should be when it comes to hiring in the security field?
I think when we talk about the talent gap in particular, the focus is always on those entry-level individuals who want to break into the field, as it should be. That's the primary focus. But what gets lost is the impact that it has on people who are already in the field. I think there's a large degree of burnout from people needing to wear multiple hats that maybe should be split up across 2, 3, 4 people, or just working more hours than they're comfortable with. So I think, the talent gap definitely impacts entry-level folks, but it also has a very negative impact on a lot of individuals who are in the field. So it's really in everybody's best interest to work on this problem.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, burnout's a big problem, and I've seen it posted about on LinkedIn, especially for some reason this last week. I think there was a study or something, or somebody wrote a paper about it, and it's pretty much gone viral. So yeah, and once you have people burn out, they may go back in IT or they may retire, and then all of a sudden your talent gap is worse. And we just need to do as an industry a better job of massive succession planning and lots more training. And if anybody watching this wants any ideas on how to do that, how to train people, how to develop people, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm happy to share some ideas. So Mike, appreciate your time. If people want to get a hold of you, how can they reach out to you?
Yep, I'm on LinkedIn, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to include a link, but I will try to get that over to Pete for you. In addition to that, you can email me directly. It's going to be carrol3399@gmail.com, and happy to help any way I can.
Awesome. Well, appreciate the time, Mike. Thanks for being on, and we'll see you guys later.
All right. Thank you.